If you really want to understand a country's economy, a great place to start is its shopping list. What does it sell to the world and what does it buy? Today, we're firing up India's trade engine to see exactly what powers this economic giant.
I mean, think about it. A nation's trade really tells a story. It shows you what it's good at making, what it desperately needs, and where its ambitions lie. So, what's the story India's trade is telling us right now? Well, let's get into it.
All right, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at what India is selling, the stuff it ships out. Then we'll flip the coin and see what it's buying to fuel its growth. And finally, we'll see how it all balances out, because that's where the really interesting part of the story is.
Okay, first up, exports. This is all about what India makes and sells. You can almost think of the entire country as this massive workshop, churning out goods that end up in every corner of the globe.
So take a look at this. You can see there's a huge range here. Everything from fancy jewelry to everyday textiles. But wow, look at the top two. Engineering goods and petroleum products. Together, they make up nearly half of everything India sells. That's huge.
So let's zoom in a little bit and see what's really driving this export machine, starting with the biggest piece of that pie.
A full quarter. 25% of India's exports are engineering goods. That makes this category the absolute heavyweight champion of the country's export economy. So, what kind of stuff are we actually talking about here?
Well, it's a whole mix of things, from cars and all their components to really complex industrial machinery. That transport equipment sector in particular has just exploded, jumping from about $16 billion to almost $25 billion in exports in just a few years. It's a perfect example of India's growing muscle as a global manufacturing hub.
And right behind that, we've got petroleum products, making up over 20% of all exports. Now, I want you to file that away, just for a second, because there is a really fascinating twist to this petroleum story that we're going to come back to later.
Of course, we can't forget the other big players. These are the traditional powerhouses of Indian exports: sparkling gems and jewelry, textiles, and chemicals. Each one of these is still pulling in over 10% of the total, which just goes to show how diverse India's export game really is.
Okay, so we've seen what India is selling. Now for the other side of the equation. What does a country with over 1 billion people and a booming economy need to buy to keep that engine running at full throttle? And when you look at the data on imports, one thing becomes crystal clear. There is one single item that completely dominates India's shopping bill.
Get this, roughly 31%, almost a third of all the money India spends on imports goes to just one thing: petroleum. It just shows you the nation's unquenchable thirst for energy to power its cities, its factories, and its transportation.
And this is not a new trend at all. The data shows petroleum has been the #1 import for a long, long time. Its share has actually grown over the years. So the real takeaway here is that crude oil is basically the lifeblood of India's entire economic machine.
But now for a story of some pretty dramatic change. Let's talk about gold, India's second biggest import. For ages, it was a massive expense. But then, look what happened. In just a couple of years, the amount spent on gold imports got cut almost in half. So what on earth caused such a massive drop?
It was really a perfect storm. First, global gold prices started to fall. At the exact same time, the Indian government rolled out new policies specifically designed to slow down gold imports. It's a great example of how fast trade can shift when market prices and government action line up.
All right, now for my favorite part. Let's put these two pieces, exports and imports, together. Because when you look at them side by side, a really cool economic story starts to unfold, especially around that one key commodity.
Hey, remember how petroleum was the #1 import and the #2 export? This is the twist I was talking about. It's what you could call the petroleum flip. India buys enormous amounts of raw, unrefined crude oil. Then it uses its massive refineries to turn that crude into more valuable products like diesel and jet fuel, and then sells those to the world at a profit.
This quote from our source material just nails it. This isn't just about buying and selling. It's a story of adding value. India is taking a basic raw material, transforming it into something much more valuable, and then exporting it. That is a classic sign of a sophisticated, maturing economy.
So, when you put it all together, here's the picture you get. India's exports are all about its manufacturing and industrial strength: engineering, refined petroleum, gems. And its imports are all about the raw materials needed to power that strength: crude oil, for example, and fertilizers. That dynamic right there is the story of India's economy in a nutshell.
But that brings us to the big, forward-looking question. As the world changes, with new technologies and a global push towards green energy, how is this picture going to change? Which of these sectors are going to drive the future, and which might fall behind? The answer to that is going to write the next chapter of India's incredible economic story.